And welcome here. I'm Joe Long, and I am back to work on site. This is not a fake background behind me today. So the camera work may be a little better or a little worse today, but it's not going to be a fake background behind us because we're actually on site and back in the museum, and hope to see some of y'all drop by tomorrow, Friday, next week. We are back in business. So thank you very much for spending a little bit of time with us this morning. And I'm going to have a good time with this morning's interpretation because I'm doing a little bit about one of the great benefactors. So here I am in the Relic Room, and places that preserve history have a history of their own. And the history of our institution is a fascinating one, I think. And one of our early benefactors is the fellow I'm going to be talking about today. And then we'll have a little bit of a close-up with some of his artifacts before the morning session is over. But first, let's meet the man himself, Benjamin Hammett Teague, Dr. Benjamin Hammett Teague. You see here two images of him, obviously from many years apart from each other, and there's a long and interesting life in between these two images of the same man. And I subtitled this From Boy Soldier to Guardian of History. And I think that summarizes the military side of Benjamin Hammett Teague's life, what he did during the war, and what he did to preserve the memories of the war afterwards. Now, someone who knew him from seeing him as a grown man walking the streets of Aiken or Charleston, South Carolina, might very well know of these military connections in some way, but they didn't think of him as a soldier. They thought of Dr. Benjamin Hammett Teague primarily as a dentist. But that's not the side of his legacy we'll be looking at most closely today. Instead, this is an account that he himself gave that relates to when and where this photograph was made. Now, young Benjamin was born in 1846. So some quick math there. That means he turned 20 the year after the war was over. And at the outbreak of the war, Benjamin Teague was underage and he was kept home. He was not of an age to join the military, but Charleston, of course, was very engaged, very passionate, and he joined and helped form actually a boys' company. The Pickens Rifles in Charleston was a group of volunteers made up of high school students. And they were actually employed at times to perform guard duties within the city around the time of secession. But, you know, they were a volunteer club of high school boys attempting to assist the cause. They were not something that would be considered part of your military career. They were more of, I'm thinking of my old junior ROTC unit in high school, keeping order, or thinking we were keeping order at football games. That's the kind of thing the Pickens Rifles were doing, with the difference they were carrying real rifles. But Benjamin chafed for genuine action. And when he turned 17 years old in 1863, he prevailed on his parents, he seized the opportunity, and he joined the Hampton Legion, Company B of the Hampton Legion, which was during, I had a furlough going on, transitioning from infantry to mounted service. So this is what he wrote about that. And remember, this is his own words about this image. With this account of the experiences of a 17-year-old Confederate soldier is given an engraving from an ambrotype made by an artist whose studio on wheels was on a side street of Columbia, South Carolina. It was taken for the girl he left behind him, to whom it was sent as his first duty on arriving in camp by the Congaree River. This was the rendezvous camp of Hampton's Legion, which, after a brilliant record as a regiment of infantry, had been furloughed for 30 days to procure good horses and join the cavalry. And with their horses, they carried good rations from home. This sturdy young soldier, to be recognized as Dr. B H Teague of Aiken, South Carolina, he wrote this himself, was able to hold his own with any of his heft and could pick a squirrel from the top of the highest pine tree with his long muzzle-loading rifle. Verily, he was as tough as a lightwood knot. He was clad in jacket and trousers made of broad new jeans and cavalry boots in the finest calfskin. His gauntlets were knitted by the tender hands of his sweetheart and presented by her when he came to say goodbye and receive the parting kiss. This was the sweetest thing that touched his lips for many a day after that. So Teague would ride off to war in 1863. He was very proud of his war record. He was never wounded, never captured, and never missed one of his unit's engagements with the enemy. And Teague is going to endure all the way until the final surrender of General Gary's brigade at Appomattox. According to a biographical sketch done by Ellison Capers, late in the war, his health broke down, which he blames on the bad food, and he refused hospitalization to stay with his comrades. The young soldier started home from Appomattox on a lame horse, notes the sketch in Confederate Veteran magazine. Despite the hospitality the young man received from homes on his return route, and he said he was never turned away and always fed anywhere that he stopped. Teague was so emaciated and ragged that his own sister did not recognize him when he arrived. He was about 140 pounds at enlistment. That's the picture you see in front of you. He weighed in at less than 100 pounds on his return. So if you can imagine that rather slight frame that he's got in the first place and take about a third of it off. He was an invalid for months, but took consolation in the doctor's provision of, quote, a 3-gallon demijohn of Applejack. He got himself some hard cider and positive attention from the ladies of the town, who held a sewing bee to reclothe him because he came home so ragged. Well, Dr. Teague would return to the education he had interrupted by going into service, and in fact would become a dentist. In 1874, 9 years after the war, he married Miss Julia Parker of Edgefield, and the couple would have 2 daughters. So his wartime experiences were certainly of hardship. He joined a hard-bitten unit partway through that war. And after the war, Dr. Teague would become a very deliberate and careful guardian of history from the war, as well as practicing his profession as a dentist. He contributed occasionally to Confederate Veteran magazine. He was extremely active in the United Confederate Veterans Association. And I have here another thing he sent to Confederate Veteran magazine, this one related to his own profession, a short sketch called Dental Fees During the War. Some time ago, I came across the following entries on the ledger of a deceased relative who practiced dentistry during the Confederate War. 1860, Mrs. H., March 17th, to 4 artificial teeth of gold plate, $20. March 17th, to extracting 2 teeth for servant girl, $2. April 19th, extracting 1 tooth for servant boy, $1. 1863, Mr. N.T., July 8th, 6 gold fillings for son, $75. 7 gold fillings for daughter, $80. July 9th, 1 gold filling for daughter, extra size, $15, and so forth. In consequence of the depreciation of Confederate money, the fees advanced enormously from 1860 to 1863. They continued to advance, and dental materials became so scarce that a gold filling cost $1,000, and gold plates were unobtainable. Such charges seem enormous in this day of good work at fair prices. But there are even now some dentists who charge excessively. A certain lady of N had planned to make a trip abroad, and that everything might be in good condition, she went to a dentist of high reputation for some little necessary work. A friend, meeting her sometime after, inquired as to the date of sailing. "Oh, I've had to give up the trip," she said, "but my dentist is going." So, not above making a little fun of his own profession, to which he also made considerable contributions. And those of us who get nostalgic for the past, one cure for that is to contemplate dentistry. But dentistry was improving, and Dr. Teague was part of that. He was on the cutting edge of his profession. He even registered a patent for a new design of dental chair. That's not his primary contribution to the Relic Room and the preservation of history, but it's part of the story because it was well known that Dr. Benjamin Teague, if you didn't have the money to pay your dental fees, he was one who was very willing to accept relics of the war. He would accept relics or artifacts in exchange for dental work. Now, this brings up a theme that I sometimes reference. It comes up because of the name of our museum. And that is the whole notion of a relic. A relic and an artifact. They're not simply synonyms. They represent a different frame of mind. For instance, next to Dr. Teague's beautiful photo there in his regalia as an officer of the United Confederate Veterans organization, you see next to it a handwritten label signed by Ellison Capers on a tiny piece, a tiny scrap of the flag of the 24th South Carolina Regiment. And in the old days, that scrap of flag was attached by a pin to the card that held it. And that scrap of flag of the 24th is an excellent example of what we think of as a relic. An artifact is an object to learn from. And doubtless there are ways in which that priceless reminder of the past does count as an artifact. You could learn things about textile dyeing processes. You could see that it is hand sewn and not machine sewn. These kind of things give you information. However, a relic is the consideration of an object mostly to make you feel a more direct connection. It is to connect you viscerally to the past. When pilgrims travel to Canterbury, hopefully telling stories to each other on the way there, they're going to see the relics of a saint, not objects that will teach them more academically about the saint, but perhaps even bones, very personal things that give them a more direct connection. Well, of course, Benjamin Teague had a very direct connection to the war he'd actually fought in, lost friends in, suffered during, and whose aftermath shaped his life. But he also considered it important to preserve the memories of that war and to pass them down. I mentioned that he was a very active member of the United Confederate Veterans Association, and we happen to have in the gallery some terrific things from that organization. The United Confederate Veterans were formed to preserve the memories of the war and the comradeship of the soldiers who'd served together. And if you look in old issues of Confederate Veteran magazine, which I commend to you, they're a tremendous amount of fun, you'll find advertisements for a uniform like this one, worn by Weller Rothrock. The buttons of this uniform have little Confederate battle flags on them, which is a giveaway that this is a post-war uniform. Those buttons did not exist during the war itself. But for just a couple of dollars, you could acquire your reunion uniform, which served as the regalia of the fraternal association of these guys, the United Confederate Veterans. And from the beginning, the United Confederate Veterans, unlike their Union equivalent, now, their Union equivalent, the GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic, that was the Union Veterans Association. And the Grand Army of the Republic was quite political. In fact, the joke was that GAR stood for generally all Republicans.
No.
But the UCV, understanding they were in a disadvantageous position to do politics in any case, they asserted they were not going to do any form of politics with the exception of lobbying their state governments for veterans' benefits. Instead, they were dedicated to the preservation of memory. And it's a little bit lighthearted, but I'm going to share something that, as a senior member of that organization, Benjamin Teague shared in 1907. Anybody here familiar with the old song, That Old Time Religion? Those of us that grew up singing it, we know that that old time religion is good enough for me. Well, that was already a quite popular song in 1907, and one day at a Confederate Veterans reunion, Benjamin Teague cut loose with the popular revival tune with the lyrics a little modified. I fought and fell back with Johnston, was in the fire with Hood and Franklin, mixed with Forrest and foraged with Wheeler, and that's good enough for me. I've tried to be reconstructed, swallowed the oath of allegiance, but in heart I'm the same old rebel, and that's good enough for me. Now I'll soon be with the boys in glory, camping in the shade of the trees, with them that's gone before me, and that's good enough for me. Well, Teague's papers are very extensive. They're held at the South Carolina Historical Society in Charleston in the Fireproof Building. And I spent a very pleasant day with them a few years back. They include correspondence with major figures of the Confederacy, Lee, Davis, and others. And the subject of much of this correspondence is his requesting things for his collection of artifacts. And this growing collection, or as he called them, relics, makes up a case in our museum today. Because at the opening of the Confederate Relic Room in Columbia, Teague's collection, part of it was put on display, and part of it remains on display, and the rest of it remains as a research resource for us and for future exhibits to this day. So, walking through the gallery, trying not to make you seasick as I shift my personal computer around. Here is Teague himself, a little bit of information about him, and all of the battlefield pickups and commemorative souvenirs here. These things are all from the Benjamin H. Teague collection. Now, living in Aiken after the war, he was particularly prone to getting artifacts from the Battle of Aiken. For instance, there's a bullet right here extracted from Lieutenant McMahon, a member of Wheeler's cavalry, who fell in a lady's front yard during the Battle of Aiken, and she bravely went out under fire to recover him from her front yard and brought him inside to lay on her couch. This is a panel from the couch on which Lieutenant McMahon died. So some of these things are the sort of things folks would keep as a reminder. The tiny splinter there. This is a piece of the U.S. frigate Housatonic. And you may remember the Housatonic was the first ship to be sunk by action of a submarine. And that submarine, of course, was the Hunley. So things from all over were collected, and very carefully he wrote these handwritten cards to which he attached the smaller artifacts. And in this way, he preserved a lot of memories of history. We're going to go back for a close-up with some of Dr. Teague's artifacts. But first, you can see here on that label, Ellison Capers, the brigade commander of the 24th, would give back his little piece of the 24th's flag, along with an account we found in Teague's papers. At the same time as the artifact, Capers sent a letter which described how the men of the 24th, not wanting to surrender their flag, decided to cut it into pieces and take it home. And he stopped them from doing this, but apparently he got his own personal piece first. And the flag of the 24th is now in the Relic Room's collection, missing a great amount of its surface area, and reunited in a way with that little piece. And you see here one of the original accession cards, using all the correct dentist terminology here, of one of the strangest artifacts in our collection. This is about half of one of General P.G.T. Beauregard's teeth. This was extracted by a dentist in Charleston, not by Teague, surprisingly enough. He came into possession of it because a brother member of his profession had extracted that tooth from General Beauregard, and he didn't say to himself, oh, here's medical waste, let's dispose of it properly. He said, this is a tooth that was in the mouth that ordered the firing on Fort Sumter. It is a piece of history and it must be preserved. So it was, and it wound up in Teague's collection and then in the collection of the Relic Room, where it's on display to this day. Now again, this is an excellent example of the relic mentality. You could technically, perhaps, if you're studying dentistry of the 1890s, you could think of something about the extraction method you could tell from the tooth, or about the dental health of this general decades after the war. But that's not what strikes us about it. What we tend to think of is, wow, what a connection, and perhaps as 21st century people, what a rather odd and morbid connection with history. But that's a tooth from General Pierre Gustave Touton. Now, while you've been contemplating the tooth, we've moved back into our prep room. This is one of the places where the magic happens around here, to get a look at some other artifacts, some from Teague's collection and others that have to do with the memories of the war through the medium of the Veterans Associations. Teague's original handwritten cards, one of the things they could be used for would be a project on historiography or museology, as he came up with his own cataloging and labeling system for the different things that he had. Number 111 of his collection. We could find the numbers in the upper corners here of the labels. And I don't know if you can tell, it is a little piece of wood presented by Captain Angus Brown of Columbia, South Carolina. Captain Angus Brown, by the way, his wife became the custodian of the Confederate Relic Room. It says so on her tombstone. And this little piece of wood here, it says, a piece of the Merrimac, the celebrated Confederate ram, which is an odd way to describe that particular ironclad. It reminds us that terminology has changed a little bit, and we might call things something different than what they were called by contemporary people. But the Merrimac, of course, is the CSS Virginia, the ironclad warship. And that's a literal piece of the wood from it, which reminds you of sort of the idea of coming back from the Holy Land. A crusader would often have a little piece of wood, which he had been told and perhaps believed was a part of the original cross, the true cross. One of the reformers wrote years later, if you put all those little splinters together, you would probably find a cross 100 feet high. But we need have no worries that this isn't an authentic and original piece, because it wasn't collected hundreds of years later or sold for superstitious reasons instead. An eyewitness, a person who was there, decided to save it and use it to interpret history. Now, I mentioned the United Confederate Veterans and their regalia. This piece is particularly beautiful and unusual. This metal ladder badge. You see here a couple of interesting things about this. Company B of the 4th South Carolina. And you see it's suspended. The various parts of it are suspended. And these ladder badges were actually very uncommon with Confederate Veterans Associations. They were much more common with the Union. So this shows a company which has begun to market memorabilia to veterans of both sides. And perhaps part of their marketing is when veterans meet veterans from the other side and say, wow, that's a really nice ladder badge you've got for your unit from Ohio. We'd like to make one for ours. Another cool thing about this is an anachronism. If you look at the crossed rifles between the words volunteer infantry, CSA, crossed rifles. Crossed rifles are commonly found on toy cappies today that children are bought in our gift shop because they have good parents who want them to feel involved with history. So please come in as soon as our gift shop is open again someday and get some of those for your kids. But commonly these toy cappies will have crossed rifles across the front, and no cap during the war had those. The crossed rifle was not the symbol of the infantry during the war. The hunting horn, the French hunting horn was. So this ladder badge of the veterans is another symbol of connection between one era and another, as the veterans themselves have accepted a new symbol for the infantry on their official veteran badge. More common and printed for special events were ribbons like this. This one is from Camp Bernard B, number 710, the Sons of Confederate Veterans in Aiken, South Carolina, 1913. That is particularly significant to Teague's story. You see, before the Sons of Confederate Veterans camp, the Bernard B camp, which is still thriving in Aiken, before this camp was the United Confederate Veterans camp with the same name. The difference being, to join the UCV, you had to be an actual veteran of the war. To join the SCV, you had to be a descendant of a veteran of the war. Well, the UCV camp, the Bernard B camp, was actually started by Dr. Benjamin Teague. And like other men from the war, he was processing his own experiences and memories and trying to teach them to the next generation. The point of history being how we can learn from the experiences of those who go before us instead of having to learn everything from our own experience. So Dr. Teague, and let me check what time we're getting to, folks. Good, I have plenty of time left. back to our tooth, and then onward to this item that's on display. And this is some interesting historiography as well. That's the piece of rope. Again, unless you were studying the manufacture of rope in the late 19th century, it's not an artifact, it's a relic, it's a keepsake. It's something that's meant to help you feel closer to the great events of the past. And this particular keepsake was part of the ceremony as they brought the statue of General Robert E. Lee into Richmond, Virginia in 1890. Not quite 30 years after the war, this statue went up, and when they did, they made the ropes extra long and had the crowd, the men, women, and children of Richmond, come out and help to pull on the ropes to create an experience where each person there could say for the rest of his life, I helped to put the statue in place. I helped pull the wagons. And when the statue got where it was going, out came the pocket knives, and deliberately the ropes were cut into pieces to be souvenirs to be taken away to show physically, as you told the story, to say, I was there. The box that the statue came in, the wooden box that it was shipped in, was also broken up into tiny pieces, each of them stamped with a portrait of General Lee, and those also became keepsakes for the crowd. And one of those, too, is in Teague's collection and on display. Well, a few notes from later in Dr. Teague's career. One that relates to his UCV prominence. General B H Teague. Now remember, he was a private during the war and a very young one. And so sometimes we bump into this in research sometimes, and somebody will want to research an ancestor, and that ancestor will be identified as major or as captain, colonel, or general. And it can become confusing because the UCV at a certain point voted to use military ranks for titles within their veterans organization. So Dr. Teague is a private in Confederate service. You won't find him in the book More Generals in Gray or anything like that. He is a general in the UCV organization. There were over 4,000 veterans at the UCV reunion at Spartanburg, and the city was crowded to its utmost capacity. Convention was held in the theater. Commander of the South Carolina Division, General Julian S. Carr, presiding. Carr made a strong address in which he paid many beautiful tributes to the soldiers of the Confederacy. At an election of officers, General B H Teague Aiken was made UCV commander. And the UCV was broken into brigades for its organization, reflecting back, of course, to their military service. Teague was a member of St. Thaddeus Episcopal Church in Aiken. And at the time when he passed away, he was a very successful and revered member of the community. He had practiced the dental profession in Aiken for 48 years. Reading from his obituary, General Teague was a faithful member of St. Thaddeus Episcopal Church and served for many years as a warden. It was while attending service at his beloved church on February the 27th that he received his call to go up higher, and he went from God's earthly tabernacle to a heavenly one. The funeral services were conducted from St. Thaddeus Church, and his body rested for the last night on earth within its sacred walls under guard of the American Legion. And early the next morning was taken to Charleston, where he was laid to rest in his family lot in historic old Magnolia Cemetery. His body was conducted to the grave by an escort of cadets from the Citadel. And while the bugler sounded the solemn requiem of taps, the color bearer held the Confederate flag over the grave as his body was lowered to its last resting place. And many of Dr. Teague's treasured relics are now in the collection of the South Carolina Confederate Relic Room in Columbia as we carry on his work to preserve the artifacts and the relics and the memories of that war. So, a really interesting man. He did a tremendous amount to preserve and processed his own hardships and experience across the duration of his life as a member of a veterans association. So thank you all for listening to me today. I've got one more artifact to point my camera at, and then if you have any questions, be thinking of them. And that is a banner from one of the last of the Confederate reunions, a banner that would have helped festoon Columbia, South Carolina, as it welcomed these old veterans. This is delicate, so I'm not going to attempt to handle it in any way. But you can see how they were celebrated. And that silk banner and other items from the UCV reside in our collection as well. Also pulled here has been an artifact of one of my favorite of the organizations that sprang up, this silk ribbon. I don't know if you all can read, the Girls of the 60s. See that? The Girls of the 60s are an organization which had nothing to do with the music festival at Woodstock. Rather, the Girls of the 60s were an organization founded by a group of former Confederate ladies to support the troops from South Carolina in World War I, in the First World War. And an excellent example of people who used their experiences and their hardships not simply as a source of grievance, but rather as something that could be a resource as they taught others to face hardships and undertake the effort to support the home front in World War I, feeling that they had more experience at doing that kind of thing than anyone else, and that experience ought to be put to good use for the benefit of a new generation. So thank you all for listening today. I see there might be a question. The silk banner, the question is it embroidered or painted? And I don't think I can get the camera close enough to it to show you. That silk banner is a painted banner. And most of the banners that I've seen from that Columbia reunion, I only recall painted ones. I don't recall an embroidered one in our collection. Of course, I don't actually have a complete mental catalog of details like that. But yeah, it is painted on silk. So thank you all very much, and I hope that you all have a terrific day.